Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 2022 Motorsport Australia member presentation. I'm Margot Foster, one of the two Vice Presidents for Motorsport Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the lands on which we are each respectively meeting and acknowledge elders past and present. We here in Canterbury are on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I'd now like to take a moment for all of us to remember Tony Seymour, who died at the Targa Tasmania event last month. Thank you. Today, I'm joined by our President, Andrew Fraser, our CEO, Eugene Aroka, and our Chief Financial Officer, Charlotte Hayes. I'd now like to let you know that we have questions and answers, and we invite you to send in your questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Please start sending the questions as soon as you like. We're looking forward to answering them later on in the session. Any general queries, please send to the team and they will deal with them later. So thank you, and we look forward to a wonderful session this evening. I'd now like to pass over to our President, Andrew Fraser.
Thank you, Margot, and good evening to everybody, and welcome to all of you from wherever you're joining right around Australia. We're joined tonight also by the other directors of Motorsport Australia, and I want to acknowledge their attendance and participation tonight also. Tonight is an important mechanism for us to report back to you on the outcomes and the events of last year, as well as looking ahead to the initiatives and the important priorities for Motorsport Australia, for the sport, for the coming year ahead. So if we reflect back on last year, it's no doubt, like the year before in 2020, it was a really tough year. But it is also important as we look backwards to also point to the fact that there's much reason to be optimistic, and 2022, I'm pleased to say, is off to a much stronger start. As we have worked our way through the last year, through the back end of the pandemic and into the new phase, we've kept a focus on grassroots motorsport. That's what's really sustained our sport through that period of time, and that's what will sustain it as we look to the future. A couple of key priorities as we look ahead. We need, as ever, to keep a focus on safety. It's a continuous job. It's a task always to keep improving, to look to technology, to look to new initiatives, to build our capability in that area. And we also need to be mindful about the overall sustainability of our sport, both in an environmental sense and more broadly. One thing I wanted to flag to members in this forum this evening is the reality that insurance is a big challenge for us. It's a challenge generally across sport. It's a challenge generally across the community. And many of you, in whatever you do in your day jobs or in other activities, will likely have come across the fact that insurance is a tough market, and particularly so for a sport like ours. And it's something that we're putting to the forefront of our strategic thinking and planning as we look ahead. One of the things that we mentioned last year was a commitment to conduct a member survey. So during 2021, we conducted that survey, and more than 2,000 of you responded to that. So thank you to those that did respond. We have reported in more detail on our website and indeed in Speedread about the outcome of that survey. But a couple of things that I wanted to touch on tonight just to call out in terms of priorities for us for the future and areas where we want to respond. On the screen, you can see to the left that the score of 98% is attributed to our officials, and that's their willingness, the willingness of our officials to share their knowledge and their expertise with new officials, to look to the pipeline of officials for the future. Having those new officials, having officials is the lifeblood of our sport. And so tonight I want to encourage those of you who are our current officials to participate in structured programs, in the sort of events and activities that Motorsport Australia runs, but more particularly of your own volition and at your own initiative, to look to the people who can be your successor, who can be an official, who can be the person who helps do the job into the future. And if we undertake that as an individual and a collective task, then we'll look to secure our future. On the right-hand side, 76% of members reported already using online services. Technology will be an increasing part of the way that we deliver our services and operate the sport, as indeed it is in all walks of life these days. But I wanted also to call out that more than 42% of people said we need to look to improve the online system, our event entry system, and that's a message that we've heard and a priority for us as we look to invest funds over the year ahead, something that Charlotte will touch on in her financial report. More generally, we were keen to see what people thought of other matters. So on diversity, there was a really clear message to us as an organisation that it's to be valued and to be prioritised, both gender diversity and other forms of diversity. A really strong message that grassroots is the key. We agree, and that grassroots needs to remain at the focus of all that we do. And again, that is a message that we've heard loud and clear. Finally, a majority of members said that they were very proud to be associated with Motorsport Australia. And while we can take certain great comfort in that, there was a sizable group of people, around 25%, who really want us to be better, to do better, and to focus on lifting what we do as an organisation. And that's a message that we've certainly taken on board and continue to focus on. As I mentioned, technology will increasingly be a part of the way that we operate, as other sports do, and indeed as all other services in the community do. And I wanted to just share with you that more than 22,000 app downloads of the app have now taken place. That's an app that continues to be developed and updated and will roll out further into the future. And we've got the new member portal live, which we're happy to take your feedback on tonight, and of course at any time as we look ahead. One matter I wanted to touch on briefly at the outset was the work that we did as an organisation with EY in the past 12 months to validate what we all know as fans and participants of the sport, and that is just how important Motorsport Australia is in a broader economic sense. So that number in the middle there is big. $8.6 billion in terms of gross economic output is a large contribution to the nation's economy. And just as importantly, on the side, nearly 17,000 jobs, direct jobs, are supported by motorsport as an industry. And it's important when we talk to government and talk to corporates about our sport, the people who write the checks to support motorsport in all its forms, that we can take something as authoritative as an EY report and demonstrate and validate what we know to be true as lovers of the sport, and that's how big and important it is in a broader sense. Finally, before I hand over to Eugene to report back on activities through the last 12 months, I wanted to mention that one of the next tasks for the Motorsport Australia board, together with the management team, is to update the current strategic plan. That, as ever, will include grassroots and a focus on our officials, as it has in the past and as it should into the future. We'll also be looking, as I've mentioned, to the role of technology, and that includes how esports fits in to the motorsport landscape. But finally, I wanted to touch on a really key focus for us as we look ahead, and that is on facilities development. That involves talking with governments and indeed with proponents of tracks and new facilities. It's something where we need to plan in the medium and long term. New facilities don't pop up overnight, and so you need to take a long-term view, and that's the responsible view we're taking as a board. So whether it's the new Drive-It NQ facility in North Queensland, or the proposal that we're supporting in Albany in Western Australia, or indeed the initiative in the Victorian state budget last week for a new home of motorsport in Victoria, we're keen to support new facilities to provide for the long-term platform for the sport to take place. So with that, I really do appreciate your attendance here tonight. I look forward to answering your questions as part of the panel later on. And it's now my pleasure to hand over to our CEO, Eugene Aroka.
Thank you, Andrew, and warm greetings to all of you joining us tonight. My job will be to touch on some key highlights, key observations of the year that was, and also go through some key statistics from 2021. It would be hard to talk about last year without mentioning the pandemic, and we managed to successfully work our way through a difficult year, managing our finances, which Charlotte will touch upon, and more importantly, also looking after our staff while continuing to maintain our service levels. I think that was a challenge for many sports, but I'm quite proud of the fact that we were able to hold ourselves in good stead throughout 2021. At the same time, we worked hard to implement some changes that had been recommended by the Recovery Task Force to simplify the sport, and that was manifested through a much simpler platform for our licenses and also for our permits, we reduced an enormous number of different variations of those two products to a much simpler form. Pleasingly, towards the end of 2021, we sort of got a glimpse of what could lie ahead in 22, and we saw a real crash for more events towards the end of 2021 through October, November and December, to the point where we couldn't even meet the demand on the facilities that were required. So that was a really good finish to the year, and we started to see our membership numbers track up through the end of 21, and they've now fed through into 2022 with some very strong numbers in the first quarter. And inevitably, we continued working with government, and we achieved some record funding throughout both 220 and 221, funding directly into the organisation to support our programs, but more importantly out to the clubs to ensure that they could either improve their facilities or actually run programs themselves with our support. And as I mentioned, we were preparing for 22, and we're actually able to increase our sponsorship and find some significant key new sponsors, whilst at the same time investing more in our championships and state and national level. So at the start of 22, we've had more entries in our rally championship and our off-road championship than we've had in our recent history. Turning to some key statistics, and I guess the obvious one to start with is our events. And as you can see from the graph that's in front of you, first of all, events drive our sport. The fact that the pandemic had such a large impact in 2020 pleasingly resulted in a response in 2021, despite some extensive lockdowns. We saw an increase of some 46% year on year. We are nowhere near where we want to be, or we weren't anywhere near where we wanted to be at the end of 21, but pleasingly we've now seen that a very strong 222 has eventuated. And I guess the best example of that is the Australian Grand Prix. Record numbers, actually set an Australian record for a national event. And of course, supercars getting back to some form of normality. But as Andrew said, grassroots have driven our sport. And even through the pandemic, we had a number of grassroots events continue to work through difficult times, and the outstanding efforts of our clubs and event promoters to get through those periods despite lockdowns in some parts of the country. Our active licences follows the trend in events, and as you can see, we dropped significantly in 20, and there was a modest increase in 22, and that just still underlines the fact that events drive our membership numbers and our licence participation. Although the trend wasn't significant at only 1.7, a lot of that was achieved in the latter part of the year, and I can say that that has fed through into 222, and in fact, the first quarter of 222 has been the strongest ever, bar 221, when there was a real rush in March to have an extraordinary 3,600 members sign up. So the signs are very good for 22, with record events, record entrants, and our numbers starting to track up. Our hope will be that we'll see a very strong trend upwards through 222 and 223. Our officials' licences were, I must say, a challenge. We suffered a 5.4% decrease on the previous year. And if you go back to pre-pandemic levels, it's as much as 10%. And again, it's probably a bit of a reflection on the lack of events, but it does tell us we need to do more work in the official space. We have secured more funding to support more officials, to mentor more younger officials, to get more women involved in the sport. But clearly it's going to be a strategic focus for us in 223 and beyond, 222 and beyond. And in fact, later this year, we'll be talking about officials at our strategic planning day to see what more we can do, because right now, motorsport is going through unprecedented popularity, as evidenced by the Grand Prix, not only here, but overseas, but also the very successful Netflix program Drive to Survive. We need to capitalise on what is seen as a real growth in popularity and find touch points for people to get involved in the sport. So it's been challenging, but we're very hopeful that we'll be able to reverse that trend and grow the numbers back up to where they should be. On a more positive note, I guess, finishing on this part of my presentation, is the car clubs. Again, you'll see there was a dip in 220 with a very strong, or reasonably strong increase in 221. We saw a number of clubs not renew in 220 because of the fact that there were events that they couldn't run. Some clubs run 1 or 2 events a year, and if it became clear they couldn't run them, they would not affiliate. But pleasingly, we've seen not only new clubs be created and join us for the first time, and see those clubs that took a break in 20 join us, but we've also seen some clubs come back into the fold, having been elsewhere, if you want to put it that way, and see the value in joining Motorsport Australia as an affiliate. And a really good example of that is the Sunraysia Motorsport Club, who rejoined and re-affiliated in 2021 and hosted a very successful second round of the Australian Off-Road Championship only last weekend, and by all accounts, one of our more successful rounds. And that's a really good example of a club not only coming back into the fold, but helping us to drive our sport. Importantly, I think it's really valid to raise the fact that we've achieved more funding for our clubs and for this organisation than we have in our more recent history. A lot of that funding has gone to direct support of infrastructure improvements, including Rob Roy having $500,000 to resurface their hill climb, and more direct funding to programs for Girls on Track or Ricardo's races, or in any other form of training that might be available for competitors and for our officials. And it's important that we'll continue with that momentum, but I believe our clubs have benefited over the last 12 to 18 months from our efforts in securing that funding. So it's a really positive note to finish on. You can see that there's been an 11% increase on the dip in 2020. We'll hope that trend will continue to go upwards. But more importantly, we're seeing real value being delivered to our clubs, and that they're delivering back for the sport by holding more events with more people enjoying more motorsport. So on that rather positive note, I'll now hand over to Charlotte Hayes, our CFO, who'll go through the financial elements of our operation.
Thanks, Eugene. So as we've already discussed, the continued effects of the pandemic were felt well into 2021, with interstate borders closed and extended lockdowns across New South Wales and Victoria. We continue to navigate our way through uncertain times, not just from an income point of view, but also in terms of events. As you will all have personally experienced, we face the constant threat of last-minute cancellations, lockdowns and restrictions. Our revenue appears only to have grown marginally from 2020 to 2021. However, the true story is somewhat masked by the impact of the federal government's JobKeeper scheme. Motorsport Australia was eligible to benefit from the commencement of the scheme in April 2020, and the end of the scheme in March 21 actually meant a reduction year on year of income of $1.2 million. Therefore, the underlying rebound in core revenue of licence, events and commercial-based income was actually an 18% increase from 20 to 21. We kept a tight rein on expenses during 21, given the uncertainty that we all faced. Our wages bill remained fairly consistent year on year. And again, all of our staff worked on reduced hours for a considerable part of the year, and we thank each and every one of them for their commitment to the organisation. We did invest more in 2021 in IT, along with the recommendations of our recovery task force and the strategic plan. And the use of technology is part of our future to become more efficient, as Andrew was explaining. The transformation was set in play in 2020 and is focused on increasing the ease of use and accessibility of all of our online platforms and applications. And finally, insurance. As Andrew touched on earlier, we are certainly not alone in seeing an increase in our insurance premiums from year to year. The increased volatility across the world has affected all insurance markets and not just our environment. Overall, premiums have increased by 65% from 20 to 21. Now, this is partly due to the fact that we received a one-off premium reduction in 2020 that the underwriters were unable to offer again in 21, but we do continue to face significant premium increases from year to year of 30% or more. Additionally, more claims on the policies mean more excess payments due, and given a number of critical incidents in 2021, these costs also increased. Our overall financial result for the 2021 year is a deficit of $488,000. If we cast our minds back to the results of the 2020 financial year, a deficit of $161,000, this could be considered a much worse outcome. However, 2020 did see the benefit of JobKeeper, the aforementioned $1.2 million, which was not repeated in 2021. Additionally, if we factor in the increased insurance costs in 21, and therefore comparing a more like-for-like year on year, 2021's result is actually dramatically better than 2020. Forward-looking, we have budgeted for a surplus in 2022, and we are currently tracking well against this budget. Just a snapshot in terms of where our money comes from. No surprises here. Our income is predominantly derived from licenses, permits, and other event-related income. We are seeing strong commercial partnership growth. This is increasing year on year, showing the growing strength of Motorsport Australia's brand. In terms of where our money goes, we are a people business, and our wages bill as a percentage of total expenses is not insignificant at 47%. However, as I mentioned earlier, with the sacrifices made by our team, the actual amount paid, wages and salaries was roughly flat year on year. I've talked about insurance, but we know that the escalating cost of premiums, which show no sign of abating, will continue to present a serious risk for us to manage. And finally, our balance sheet remains strong. Yes, the majority of that is represented by our building here in Canterbury, but our net current asset position is also positive, and that's a key indicator of financial health and has enabled us to navigate through the uncertainty of 2020 and 2021. I'll now hand back to Margot for the Q&A session.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Eugene. And thank you, Charlotte, for a comprehensive summary of the year that was. Now's the time for our Q&A, and thanks to everybody who's been sending in the questions. So I'll read them out as they come in and then hand over to Andrew, Eugene or Charlotte to answer them. Our first question is from Andrew McGrath. As a member with a disability, I would like to be more involved in motorsport. What are your thoughts on encouraging diversity and inclusion in motorsport? Andrew.
Thanks, Margot, and thanks to Andrew for the question. I can share not only my thoughts, but I can also share the thoughts of the membership, because this was indeed one of the questions that we asked in the membership report. So I think it's really important for us as an organisation to be inclusive and to offer those opportunities. And happily, when we asked the broader membership about the importance of this, they also agreed with that proposition. So fundamentally, as an organisation, both from the board's perspective, from management, but also the broader membership, this is something that we want to provide for. I'm also very conscious that disability can take very different forms, and so that means we need to be responsive to individuals. So for Andrew, whatever your passion is for what you'd like to be involved in whether that's involved on the track, whether it's involved as an official, whether it's involved in all the different ways that you can be involved in our sport, please get in touch. And if there's an opportunity to provide some support that's responsive to your individual needs, then that's what we'll do.
Thanks, Andrew. Our next question is from Jeremy Kath. I noticed that things like sign-on have disappeared from the app. Are there still plans to have things like electronic sign-on at events, and also creating a digital passbook for officials and competitors rather than a paper-based system?
The short answer to that is yes, except that it takes considerable investment and time and money. And having been through a tough 2 years financially, we have to be very conscious of how we do that. I can assure you there is a digital and IT transformative plan, and we are working our way through it. The app is only the start of it, and we are very confident that within the next 12 to 18 months, everything from permits to logbooks to entry, paperless entry, contactless entry, are all going to be features of our evolving and continuing to grow IT engagement with our members. So as Andrew mentioned, the portal's been up now, the app's obviously getting some traction. We'd ask members to be patient because, again, it costs money to implement many of these new initiatives, but we are committed to doing so, and we will be doing it over the next 12 to 18 months.
I'll just add one thing to that, which is if we think about the way the modern world operates, you can do your banking online while sitting in the back of the bus or book a flight. And so for us as an organisation, being able to have that same ability to access and do what you need to do in terms of signing up or filling out a particular entry online is really important. As Eugene said, it's going to take some time to get there, but more importantly, it also is much more efficient. And that means that we can operate the organisation more efficiently. And we're always conscious that when we undertake these investments, it is about also saving money in the medium to long term to ensure that the organisation is efficient, not only user-friendly, but more efficient.
Thank you. Our next question is from Zachary Dawes. What are some of the initiatives that you are going to look at for officials, especially in the development of attracting new and young officials?
Well, as I mentioned, we will be looking at this through our strategic plan, but already we've initiated some changes. We've improved the officials matrix to make the pathway clearer and simpler. We've even achieved funding from Queensland, for example, to select 10 women to be able to be mentored through an officiating program. And we are talking regularly to some of our senior officials about ways we can improve the engagement with our younger officials. There is a perception of a bit of a glass ceiling, or probably not the right terminology, but of a bit of a closed shop. As the demographic that has consistently dominated our sport is moving on, and we're getting the new generations coming through, everything from esports to more direct and efficient engagement of officials is something we're exploring. So there's no quick fix. And as many of you would know, today's society, it's not as easy to engage with younger people who may have to spend hours and hours at a track to support an event. So we're looking at ways, and we've got sponsors who really want to work with us. And I mentioned Supercheap, who are actually looking at bringing a lot of their employees into a program to support engagement at officials level. So we've always been committed to officials. It takes a fairly strong investment financially and time-wise. And so we will be looking at how we can up the ante in that space. So I know it's a long answer to your question, but we are very cognizant of the drop and the need for us to bring the numbers back up and actually grow them.
I might just add again one further comment, and that is at the Grand Prix, as I attended the sign-on on Thursday morning, I came across a lot of people who were signed up for the first time, people who wanted to get involved in the sport. And so that was actually a strong positive sign for me, but it also underscores the opportunity we have at events like that to be able to capture those people, and people are interested turning up for the first time. And that's something that you'll see us doing increasingly into the future.
Thank you. Richard McKee asks, why does Motorsport Australia refuse to be a strong voice in advocating and lobbying for new motorsport facilities that can be used for grassroots motorsport in New South Wales? Motorsport needs to walk the talk. Track alternatives are the only litmus test.
I might comment first, and that is to say, one of the things that we've mentioned already tonight is when it comes to these matters, lobbying governments of all persuasions in all parts of Australia is part of the job. I've personally been in the Minister for Sports office in New South Wales in the last couple of months advocating for motorsport. I know that the interaction has occurred over time with officials in New South Wales. So we are there making the case for motorsport. And one of the things that's been really important in that regard is the EY report, which we touched on earlier, which does demonstrate the value of motorsport when we go to government. So if you've got a particular suggestion, happy to take it on board, but please be assured that we've already darkened the doorstep and hung around in the halls of the New South Wales government, precisely advocating for our sport.
Thanks, Andrew. A two-part question from Sean McShane. Something that would help officials would be to provide a voucher or a shirt that is suitable for events. It would also assist if Motorsport Australia were able to organise a partnership with a fuel company that provides discounts to assist officials getting to events.
We actually have a member program for our members that can take advantage of certain discounts and benefits that apply. I don't think it applies to fuel, but we are expanding that program on a regular basis. As far as shirts and other vouchers or reward and recognition, they're one of the things that we will certainly be concentrating. Again, I probably need to remind members that we've had two very tough financial years where we've had to manage staff who've been on reduced salary up to 60% for large parts of the last 2 years. So these programs need funding, and our focus will be to get the financial position back to a state where we can invest more in some of these activities. And so I can assure you that Shane, I think it was Shane, that we will be looking at how we can find the right touch points to invest in our officials. And if it means more shirts, if it means more vouchers, we're certainly happy to look at those. But we do think a more sustained program around educating and supporting and mentoring and coaching and protecting our members and our officials is very important.
Thanks. Charlotte, this might be one for you. Stephen Horriban asks, I'm interested to hear about where the insurance costs are being apportioned and where the insurers believe where the risk lies and where the data indicates where the risk lies.
That's a very in-depth question that I don't have all of the answers to right at my fingertips. But realistically, from a public liability point of view, we can't escape the fact that competing in motorsport comes with significant risk. And obviously, as with any insurers and underwriters across the world globally at the moment, they're reviewing those risks and reassessing the their assessment of that risk. So yes, particularly on our public liability, that's where we've seen increases just coming out of a number of incidents, and some of them have been quite historical. So even if we have a good year with no incidents or no claims, it can be historical open claims that come back to increase premiums a little bit later down the line. So it's a very, very complex area, and as Andrew touched on, it's certainly an area that we're looking at from a strategic point of view of how to position our insurance portfolio so that we still can maintain the same level of coverage, but at a more competitive cost, if that is indeed possible.
It might be worth adding that we've managed to maintain costs to our members over the last 3 years, despite industry-wide national and international increases in insurance for no good reason. I've heard of entities and organisations that have had 50% increases without a claim. So there's been a bit of a correction in the insurance market. There have been some insurers that have left the market. So that's meant that those that are still in there are able to put their prices up. And so it's an industry-wide, sport-wide, in fact, it's right across many other industries that we're seeing this explosion, if you want to call it that, in insurance. And we'll hope that that will eventually settle and plateau. Our responsibility is to make sure that we manage costs as much as we possibly can for our members so that the sport doesn't become unaffordable.
Another question from Jeremy Cath. Curious to know what percentage of the Motorsport Australia professional staff spend time actively trackside to help them understand what the day in the life of a grassroots official is?
Well, it's been a bit difficult with the pandemic to get our members or get our staff out to events, but we actually have a program encouraging all staff members from finance to IT to motorsport to go to club events and not just turn up and stand by the side and watch what happens, actually contact the club secretary or president and offer to assist. And you can also see teams of Motorsport Australia staff at the off-road races, the rally races, actually performing a role in broadcasting some of those events. So I think as the pandemic has eased off and we're able to get people back into the office, we're actually now getting them back to the tracks. And at any given weekend, you'll see a number of Motorsport Australia employees. Obviously, being based in Victoria, it makes it very hard for us to fly people around the country. But where there are the opportunities, we are doing that. And as I said, our staff are actually encouraged as part of their professional development to get out to clubs and offer to help them as much as possible.
So I might just add to that, and from my perspective, it's something which I place a personal priority on. So I'll be at Morgan Park at Warwick on Sunday for the historic meeting there, and at the Mount Cotton Hill climb in a couple of weeks' time. Always happy to go along to grassroots events. I think it's what's really important, whether you're the president of the organisation or working in finance, to be able to see how the sport operates and to stay in touch with it. I would just note that when I turned up to the last Shannon's event on Phillip Island at about 6:30 in the morning, my ticket was collected by the head of HR, who was also being ably assisted by the travel officer here. So it is a case of all hands on deck, but it can be encouraged at all points. And if you'd like someone to come and visit your event, then please let us know.
I might add, Andrew, we have a number of our staff members who are actually club members who actually compete or go out and officiate. I don't know what the percentage is. It's probably closer to 20 to 25%. So we're quite proud that many of our staff love the sport and participate on their own at the sport at various levels. So that's probably worth noting.
Thanks, Huge. Shane Laurie is saying, given that grassroots is where the future lies, what plans are there to assist getting clubs to get their head around needing to get their event information out to the media, and not just the ones who put their email in the recycle bin, so people can find information easily rather than having to find each individual club and see what they are up to?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say that our media team, and it's evidenced through Speed Read, are always willing to assist any event in promoting the event. Everything from props for government funding or for commercial sponsorship. We helped and worked with Pooncarie, for example, and the Sunraysia Club in getting them an opportunity to find funding, and right to filming to the actual event and promoting it both pre and post. But importantly, I think it's worth noting that our social media and digital work behind the scenes is ever constant, and we'll continue to provide that service. And as far as helping clubs more directly with engaging, again, we'll look to put some webinars on. I know that Paul Reardon, for example, our head of media, has actually given lectures at the FIA on social media and developing more interaction with your members. So I'd encourage any event promoter, any club secretary that's putting on an event to reach out to us beforehand. You'll be surprised at how much we can do to assist you in providing that service to your members and getting the word out. And as recent as the 6 hour and even the 12 hour, we're out there working actively to try and support both the competitors, officials recruitment, and also promote the event.
Thanks. I'll direct this next question to you, Andrew. It's from Ian Wheeler. Excuse me. Is there an official Motorsport Australia inquiry underway after the unfortunate incident at Targa, Tasmania this year?
Thanks. So before I answer the question, I do want to emphasise that the priority for us here is obviously the care and concern of Tony Seymour's family and friends, and indeed the broader Targa community, given the events of the last month. And obviously, given what occurred, there is an investigation underway. When there is a fatality, obviously the coroner is involved, and so that can impact the ability for us as an organisation and the people conducting that investigation to access critical evidence, whether it's related to the vehicle itself or to other data and information. So an investigation is underway. What I would say is when we look back to the event last year and the circumstances of last year, obviously we undertook a thorough assessment and investigatory tribunal, which looked at a whole range of matters and proposed a range of recommendations and initiatives to better manage the safety in that event. Now, when we face the same outcome this year, obviously it behoves us as an organisation, both legally and ethically, in my view, to be thoughtful about what we do for the future. So we are considering how we might address what form events take in the future, what more can be done, what more should be done, and what might be possible, and frankly, what might not be possible. That's something that we're being thoughtful and considerate about, and will obviously keep the membership and other stakeholders updated as information comes to light and as decisions are made. I do want to emphasise that as we consider that, we have to be thoughtful not only about that particular element of our sport, but when it comes to impacting the broader licence to operate, whether with government or communities or authorities that we require to work with to conduct all forms of motorsport, we need to be thoughtful about how that can impact every other form of the sport. And we need to be thoughtful, as Charlotte was intimating in the question earlier, what it can mean for the risk profile for something as important as insurance, which can impact every member of Motorsport Australia, given that the insurance policy covers all forms of the sport. So it's important to emphasise that yes, an investigation is underway. That may take some time, and given that obviously there's a need for us to be thoughtful about how we might approach the coming months in terms of that type of tarmac rally, and that's something that we'll form conclusions on as information comes to light and as we're able to make some interim conclusions and then final conclusions, and we'll communicate those when we form those views.
Thanks, Andrew. From Kevin Radel, how do we get more grassroots level Australian championships? Autocross is a key pathway to rally, and we still have no Australian level championship to keep juniors and seniors chasing their dreams.
Hi, Kevin, from Mount Gambier, I believe. I hope you're well. Look, we've been in a period of 2 years where there's been a bit of a halt to the sport, and as we are now getting more and more events up, I know that Pravin and his team are working on a number of different initiatives to look at everything from autocross to some of the more grassroots. So it's actually very much a grassroots event. Having said that, you don't just flick a switch and create a championship. There are some requirements and some criteria that need to be met, and we have a policy in place that's being updated as we speak. So, Kevin, always happy to talk to you offline, as we often do, but it's something that certainly over the next 12 to 18 months, as the sport gets back into its groove and actually sees some growth and some financial support, we'll actually be able to not only come up with a plan for those championships, but support them in a number of ways, from media to on-the-ground logistics. So stay tuned. And again, it's a very good point for us to take into a strategic plan, because part of a strategic planning effort or session is to not only identify the opportunities but also make some budgetary decisions around supporting those initiatives. So again, stay tuned, Kevin, and again, and in particular to you, because I know what you do for the sport in your area. We really appreciate all your efforts.
Thanks. This is a very specific question from Roy Davis. Why did you downgrade competitive stages in TT30 without consultation with competitors?
Well, I think at the end of the day, we sat down with the organiser and made a decision that we felt was necessary in the circumstances based on the information we had. Sometimes you need to make a decision independent of what other stakeholders may think. A death is something to cause real reflection on the risks and the possibilities of further incidents. It happened essentially at the start of the event, and whilst it was unfortunate for the competitors who were at the competitive elements of that event, couldn't continue, we actually debated whether to call off the event completely. And so I think we had to take into account the local issues, the state government's views about it, the police we consulted with. So we did consult with a number of stakeholders, but ultimately we had to make the decision that we felt was best for the sport at the time in those circumstances. We knew it wasn't going to be popular. We offered the competitors the opportunity to continue in the tour. We know it's not the same, but as I said, I can tell you quite honestly that there was a deep discussion around actually continuing the event for the remainder of that 5 days. So not popular, but sometimes we've got to make decisions that we believe are for the benefit of the whole sport.
Thanks, Huge. From our international audience, we have a question which is part crystal ball and part rigorous planning. From Siadat in Indonesia, how do you see the prospect of 2022 if the pandemic doesn't stop, or maybe there is another disease that can disrupt the Australian motorsport event?
Welcome to our friend in Indonesia. It's fantastic to see that we've got our international friends dialing in and zooming in. I think one thing that the pandemic has taught many organisations is around flexibility and pivoting and being a little bit more nimble when the circumstances arise. It'd probably be a bit unrealistic not to expect there's a risk of further pandemic and interruptions, but investing in a lot of the things we did during the pandemic with the recovery task force, the IT and digital improvements, means that the opportunity, should something again occur, presents us with learnings that we will then be able to put in place. There are some events that you can't manage, and we're seeing right now that the sport is growing, even though we still have the presence of COVID. So it's shown that we are being flexible, and I think we'll learn more and more from what happened in the last 2 years, and again look to try and improve how we can respond when situations arise. Having said that, there may be some situations that all the best planning in the world will not be able to avoid. So we do hope to all our friends around the world that we're getting to a point where we'll be able to compete with greater safety without the risk of further interruptions through pandemics.
This next one is from Mark Andrews, which I think is a thank you. The last few years have been challenging. I would like to acknowledge the Motorsport Australia staff we have worked with who have kept pushing through adversity. So I think that's lovely to hear. Thank you. Thanks, Mark. From Rain O'Keefe, as a media rep and a member, I can confirm the media team are doing a great job, definitely assisted with the Shannon's events. The issue I've found is the inconsistency in working with the media at club organising team level. Having to go through multiple accreditation processes and dealing with different levels of communication, or in some cases, no information, is frustrating. Perhaps some media training for the clubs, and it would be good if we just had the one accreditation process.
Thank you, and we'll take that on board. As I said previously, we're quite proud of our media team. They do a wonderful job. To do this 2 years ago would have been unimaginable, and we do it all ourselves. I think that Paul, who's here tonight, can take that on board and look at not only holding a webinar or a Zoom session so that we can give some information on how we can help and work with you, but also looking at other opportunities through some club development funding, for example, is an opportunity for clubs to tap into some media training or some media work that they can put to their own advantage. So it's a really good point. I'm very proud of all of our staff, but our media team have risen to the occasion, and I'm sure they can help you out going forward. And again, Paul will be taking a note about looking at webinars for this very thing.
Right, thank you. Well, that appears to be the end of the questions that have come in online. We still have some time if you'd like to put pen to paper or fingers to the keyboard. But in the, I do have a question. Will 2022 see more of a rollout of the planned digital logbook licence platforms? And also, will Rosterify be used more widely for state level events? This is from James Whelan.
I can answer the first part fairly confidently that yes, we are looking at rolling it throughout 2022. I might just mention, many people don't know that we actually did lose our IT manager in the middle of 2021, and for a significant period of time did not have an IT manager in place. It was nearly 6 months. And in fact, Matt Wraith, who's now joined us, started in January 2022. So he's using the last 3 months to really get a thorough understanding of where we're at. But we have a plan, and it may be tweaked, but I can assure you that things like logbooks, permits, events, paperless activities are all very much on the agenda and on the plan. As far as Rosterify is concerned, we know that it has got a place and it has got a use. I can't answer the question right now as to its applicability generally across the board. I think our IT manager, newly started, is looking at that very issue and whether or not there might be other programs that can achieve the same role that we can actually manage ourselves. So stay tuned on that point, and I can undertake that I'll take back to Matt that very point and see what we can do. And I actually have said previously that Matt, now that he's settling in, will hold a webinar to actually all of our clubs and members to give an update on what he sees as being some of the more pressing changes that will happen in the next 6 to 9 months and the longer term. So he'll look forward to doing that in the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Great, thank you. So I'll just hand over to Andrew for a few words.
Thanks, Margot. I just wanted to take the opportunity as we wrap up this evening to thank everyone for their attendance. From my point of view, I think this is a really important initiative where we stand before you virtually, as is the case these days, but can share with you the insights into the actual operation of the organisation, to provide you the details of our financials, which of course have now been audited and will be lodged and available in our annual report in the coming weeks. But we are resolved to do this each year at around this time each year when those audited accounts are finalised, to be able to share transparently with you the outcomes in the organisation. Last year, you wanted us to be briefer at the start, so I think we did that, and to provide more opportunity for questions, and so hopefully we've done that tonight. But this isn't just a one-off opportunity. As was mentioned earlier, if you do have questions at any time, then please get in touch and we're happy to respond to those. But in the meantime, can I thank you all for your attendance this evening, and look forward to seeing you at an event sometime soon.
Thank you. And let me just close by thanking Andrew, Huge and Charlotte for their very in-depth and interesting, comprehensive reports, and to those in the room with us tonight and the whole of the Motorsport Australia organisation, of which you're all part of the broader family. So thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you.